Well, thank you all for coming today. We're so happy to have Adrienne Celt here to read from her first book, The Daughters. And she's going to kick it off by reading a portion of the book, and then we're going to go into a question and answer.
I thought I would just do a short reading. I'm really happy to be here because I used to help run the Authors at Google team, which we will talk a little bit about later, I think. So I'm going to do a short reading from the beginning. This is the Prelude. All my grandmother's important stories took place in the Polish countryside, like this one. A woman sits nude on the branch of a tree and lets her brown legs dangle into the open air. The bark ridges cut pleasantly into her thighs, and she presses her palms down, curls her fingers around the bough. A man walks towards her through the woods, pushing aside whip-thin limbs of birch and beech, sidestepping shrubs as he searches for his lost path. The woman hums a song, and the man's feet begin to fall in time with the music. He does not realize that this is happening, does not yet feel his body in thrall to her. It is a surprise, then, when he catches sight of her legs. He's far from his village, tired and thirsty. The last thing he expected to find here was another person, particularly a woman who is naked and glorious and alone. Her feet are calloused, the soles covered in dirt, and they hang before him like clothes left to dry in the wind. He follows the smooth blue ridges of her veins up to her calves, her fingers, her breasts, her neck, to the soft and downy lobes of her ears. When he looks into her face, she smiles, and his surprise becomes recognition. His thirst disappears as the scent of a nearby river fills his nose and mouth, wets his tongue. The man knows that he's met the love of his life and that she is going to devour him. This is an old story. While the aroma of clean water lingers in the air, the woman asks the man for a gift of bread and salt, which he will feed to her with his own fingers. He's already trembling, imagining it. His body is vibrating with desire. The man shimmies up the trunk of the tree and swings onto the branch beside his beloved. The closer he gets, the more she smells of river currents, the rush of waves over mossy rocks, releasing the green musk of water plants. Tilting her head to the side, the woman beckons him with her fingers. He leans in to kiss her, closer, closer. He bobs in his head in time with her song, and as they embrace, her humming rumbles through him. He has never felt so entwined with someone, so protected. After a moment, his heart stops beating, and his body drops to the forest floor with a muffled thud. What happened next? I asked my grandmother, my Baba. That, she said, depends on who's telling you the story. Most people don't understand the rusalka, and so they wouldn't tell you that she has tears in her eyes as she jumps down from the tree and lands softly in the leaves. They wouldn't tell you of her heaving sobs of regret as she walks back to the river, her body light as air. But then again, my Baba said, what most people would tell you is also true, that she will find another man, that she will do it again. She will sit in the tree and sing her song as often as she needs to, take as much strength as she requires to survive.
Beautiful. Thank you for reading.
You're welcome.
So my first question for you, Adrienne, is how did you get the idea for this book?
That is a great question.
Thank you.
So I started writing this book in grad school, and it began as a short story. Mm-hmm. And part of the idea of it, I mean, in a certain sense, it was an inspiration, so I don't know where it came from, but I have two grandmothers, both of whom are Polish, mm-hmm. and one of who I spent a lot of time with was very much a storyteller. So some of my interest both in storytelling as an activity within a family and also as a way to pass down information about culture and family comes from experience, even though the stories that my grandmother told aren't in this book. These ones are made up.
Mm-hmm. And how long did it end up taking you to write the novel?
I want to say all told, from beginning to publication, probably 5 years. 5 years. But so I started in grad school with a story, and then I expanded that over the course of maybe a year into a novella. Mm-hmm. And then that also felt too short, so I expanded that into a novel, and then that again took at least a year or so to revise. So, it wasn't like actively I was writing 8 hours a day
Right.
during all of those years. I was also in grad school writing other things, or I was working.
Right.
But that was the timeline.
And you're in kind of a unique situation because you are working also almost full-time at Google and writing on the side. Can you talk a little bit about how you balance those two things?
Yes, I can. It's. I mean, I have a really strict schedule. Sometimes I talk to people who have children, and they say having a strict schedule is like the only way that I can live my life and maintain any sanity. And I actually feel exactly the same way, even though I don't have a child. So I very religiously, so to speak, write for an hour every morning before I start working, which is possible because I work from home. So I can just get up, walk the dog, write for an hour, drink some coffee, and then get started on daily work. But I also don't work on Fridays, so on those days I either work all day or go horseback riding and then work the rest of the day. And then I work a lot on the weekends.
Yep. And when you were writing this, were you also searching for an agent at the same time, or did you finish the novel and then go through the process of searching for an agent?
I finished a full draft of, I think probably 2 full drafts of the novel before I started looking for an agent. And then I talked to a couple of different people, and based on their feedback, actually ended up revising it another time before I went on another serious search for an agent and got, signed with my agent.
Do you have any advice for aspiring writers within the Google community in terms of finding an agent?
Google can help you for what? Not the company, the search engine.
Yeah.
But first of all, I would say be really sure that the book is done before you're ready to send it out. I mean, that's different if you are writing nonfiction. I don't know as much about that. I know that can be sold on proposal. In fact, it's usually sold on proposal. But fiction, you want to have a book that you feel is as good as you can make it. So probably not the first draft. So first thing I would say, put it aside for a few weeks after you're done. Give it to a couple of people you trust who are not agents and have them read it, and just like marinate on what they say and what you think, and revise a lot. But then in terms in a practical sense, there's a ton of agents out there, and so you really want to not be carpet bombing them, but although you do want to contact probably a lot of them, a good place to start is to look in the acknowledgements pages of books that you think are kind of like the book that you wrote, and see who those people's agents are. And that gives you a starting point because you can research their agencies, see if they have young agents that also might be a good fit, and then from there, see who their other clients are, and you can also go to websites like Poets and Writers Digest, and they'll have a long list of agents of all stripes. Also, being up on literary Twitter helps.
What is literary Twitter?
Just the literary community as it exists on Twitter.
And so you're very involved with the Twitter community?
Probably too involved. Yeah, it gets a little bit self-amplifying. But there are a lot of people on there, and a lot of people who are willing to have conversations with you no matter what level you're at. And there are agents, you don't mostly want to be pitching them on Twitter, but you can get a sense of who they work with and what kind of person they are and what their interests are. And then when you're writing them a query letter, which is how you actually get in touch with an agent, you can mention in the first sentence or two, I saw you on Twitter that you did X, Y, and Z, and it just makes it a little more personal, and it lets them know that you actually did your homework and know who they are and what they like, and that's why you're sending them your book instead of just having them feel like you're sending them a dear sir or madame.
Right. And how many query letters is typical for someone to write? How many query letters did you send out?
There probably isn't a typical number. I probably sent out 20, I want to say. And of those 20, some of them were nice no's, some of them were total no responses, some of them were really depth. A few of them were really in-depth analyses of the book as they saw it, and then one was my agent.
And then once you had found your agent, how long did it take until you found someone to publish the book? I
want to say another couple of months after that. It was we revised it and then we sent it out on a couple of rounds of submissions, and ended up, there were a few different people who showed interest, and this was the person that we sold it to, Katie Adams at Liveright, was the best one.
Great. And so when you were going through revisions with your publisher, what kinds of revisions did they ask for? How did you change the story?
So one example, just an example of a revision that we made, was we cut an entire chapter.
Oh.
The reason that we cut it is that my editor felt, and I agreed, that it distracted attention from the main storyline in a way that really pulled emotional focus. One of her really great insights, I thought, was that the main thrust of the story in the present day, there are a lot of different threads in this book, in the past, in the present, in the near past versus the distant past, etc. And she said, she sort of honed in on what the most important thing happening in the present was in terms of the arc of the novel, being the relationship between Lulu, the main character, and her mother, Sarah, and how bringing that to a close, or to a climax and then a close.
I see.
So anyway, cutting that chapter helped focus on that.
As you were talking, it reminded me of another question I wanted to ask you, which is that the novel does jump around between the past and the present quite a bit. And I was wondering if you wrote the novel in chronological order, if you mapped it out before you wrote it, if you just let the words flow from your fingertips. What is your writing process like?
So it's different for everything, but in this case, I did not write it chronologically at all. I mean, there are parts of the book that I did write in the order that they appear here, but because there are so many threads, and because the different threads interact with each other on different levels and can interact with each other on different levels, it was a very modular book as I was writing it, and so I reorganized it a lot, and that was that was another edit that Katie made. She switched the order of two chapters in a way that I really liked. So I do tend to try to write from start to finish, but it doesn't always work. You can't control it.
Right.
And this book I'm working on another book now, and that book I did write more in a linear fashion than this one, I would say.
And that book, what is your next book about?
My next book is still in the process of being written, so it's still sort of a secret, but it's it is on a basic level about a girl who is in the wrong place at the wrong time in a southern border town in Arizona, and ends up kidnapped by a couple of members of a cartel, and then ends up on a horseback ride throughout northern Mexico. And it's a little bit, it's an adventure story, hopefully.
Right.
But it's also a sort of a meditation on how much your mind, how much of your experience you can rely on people believing, and therefore how much what you experience of something is true when the outside world is going to perceive it a different way, which is actually, although they're very different books, I would say that element is also present in a certain way in The Daughters, because you get the storyline, the stories. The protagonist is told by her grandmother, Ada, about what happened in their family's history in Poland are very magical and mystical fairy tales, but the same stories are told very differently by her mother, in a more realistic, sort of darker sense. So, yeah.
Is there a version of the truth that you tend to believe more? Do you align yourself with the grandmother's version, or do you align yourself with the mother's more realistic version?
For a second, I thought you meant in life.
Oh, no.
I don't know.
In your book.
I think I probably, like Lulu, the protagonist, I sort of hover somewhere between them. I think that they have, both Ada, the grandmother, and Sarah, the mother, have their reasons for believing that things happened the way they happened, and they have their reasons for saying the way things happened the way they happened, which are not necessarily the same things. And I think that their experiences are as real as any reality in a certain sense. So they are both important for Lulu, and therefore they're both important for me.
I see. Do you have a favorite character in the book?
It's like asking a mother with many children. It's fun to write sort of like the bad guy. So in this book, Sarah is sort of, she's not the bad guy, but she's a dark character, and so she was a lot of fun to write. Sarah, the estranged mother of the protagonist.
Was there a character in the book that was very difficult for you to write?
I would say maybe Lulu's husband John was hard for me to write.
And what was challenging about writing him?
I would partially just the fact that in my initial vision for the book, because it started out, it went through all of these different permutations in terms of size and focus. Yeah. Originally, I had this idea that it would almost not involve men at all, and that ended up not being emotionally realistic for the book. But he was a character that then I had to do a lot of thinking about what he meant to Lulu and what he meant to the story. So because he wasn't as much part of my original vision, I guess that made it harder for me to write him.
So one thing that you include in the story is, one of the main threads in the story is about music. Did you have to do a lot of research in order to write that component of the book?
You mean you don't think I'm an opera singer?
Well, I can tell that you're an opera singer, but I was wondering if you had to do additional research.
No, so I'm not an opera singer, and I did. So a lot of the book was actually written before I did the research that I am about to describe, and so the first research that I did was I did play music when I was younger, and I have a very passionate attachment to music, but am not a musician. I wouldn't call myself a musician now. So I did a lot of listening to music, a lot of listening to opera, a lot of reading about opera. And then I took singing lessons. I did take voice lessons with an opera voice, like a vocal coach, while I was in grad school. And I wouldn't say that I got really good at singing, but she kept encouraging me to try to, she's like, your voice could hit high notes. You should try to hit the high notes. And I was like, I don't think you're right. But that's beautiful that you think so. Yeah. But in doing that, I learned a lot about the physical expression of music, and I also learned a lot about the way opera people talk, like that. Not like that. I interviewed that teacher as well, and she gave me a lot of insights in terms of the opera world and the idea of a musician's body, a singer's body as an instrument that came in very, very handy.
Were you sad when you were finished writing the book?
I don't know, because it was such a long process of finishing. There was the time that I finished and signed with my agent, and I was just happy. There was the time when I sold it, and I was just happy. And then there were the edits, and I was relieved when they were done, because they were kind of on a timeline. And then after that, there were copy edits, and after that, there were 2 rounds of proofreading. So it took a long time to be done. And in the middle of all that, I started writing my new book. So I don't think I had as much of the postpartum depression, which I don't say just because mothers and children are a theme in this book. People really do talk about it that way. I don't think I had it as much. I feel like maybe now that I'm releasing it into the world and I'm starting to get to the end of the period where it's going to be exciting for people to talk about on literary Twitter. Now I'm sort of oh, but it's my book that I did. Let's always be excited about it forever.
Right.
But yeah, so I guess no, but I feel it coming.
Well, speaking about putting the book out into the world, as a first-time published author, what has it been like for you reading the reviews and getting feedback from the outside world?
Really weird.
Yeah.
I mean, any writer, once you get to the point of being published, publishing a whole book, for the most part, you're probably going to have, and God, I hope for all of you aspiring writers out there, you have some experience with other types of submission and rejection and acceptance before you get there that helps you develop a thick skin. I have published quite a few short stories in literary magazines, so I know very intimately the process of being just rejected out of hand, or lavishly praised, or you publish something and nobody cares. So I'd experienced all that before, and so I didn't anticipate it being as big of a deal. But it is it's a very vulnerable feeling in a strange way. Even if you're used to having people, I'm not at all weird about the idea of people reading it. That doesn't make me feel sad or scared or anything like that. But seeing it is amazing that being the case, and even being able to be analytical about like, oh, okay, no one review matters. It's very strange to see people talk about it on Amazon or Twitter or like Goodreads or whatever. And you're just like, but you're not. How do you don't even know what it's like? And then you just think, you have to teach yourself to put it aside and not care. Especially since a lot of the reviews have been very positive, and it's just easier to let that wash all over you than it is to let the one guy who didn't like it wash past you.
Right. Do you even read the negative reviews, or do you try to?
I try not to.
Yes.
Yeah. Because it's just not worth it.
And who was the first person that you let read your book?
Probably one of my grad school professors. There were several people who read pieces of it in grad school as I was working on it. And then my friend Brandon Boyer-White, who's also a writer, and although it sounds like she's a man, she's a woman. She is probably my first reader in most things.
So I remember we were working together when you were actually working on this story. Yes, and I believe that the first title for the novel that you had was Rusalka, and now it's The Daughters. Can you talk about why you changed the title?
I can, yes. Yeah. So Rusalka, the myth of the Rusalka it's a Polish and Slavic myth about a water spirit. The excerpt that I read at the beginning is actually sort of a retelling of that myth. She's sort of a wraith, or as one of my first readers read the beginning of the book, and he looked at me, and he's a very serious, literary fiction person, and he said, "I knew you were writing a book about vampires." And actually, he was kind of right.
Yeah.
So that's important because of the Polish history that weaves through the book, but Rusalka is also a Dvorak opera, and so those two elements ended up becoming very important in the book, and so that it was sort of a natural title. But the reason I changed it, my publisher wanted to change it, not my editor so much as the marketing team, who you sort of have to do what they say. And I was sad to change it, but I kind of saw it coming, because a lot of times people who know about opera or know about Polish history are all really sad that I changed it. But people who don't would hear the old title and say, "Oh, that's so cool, Ruska what?" And so The Daughters, we talked.
It's a lot easier to pronounce.
It's a lot easier to pronounce. It's easier to remember. And I still think it has a very strong, a sort of strong tang of like. It's a little bit creepy. It's also lovely. It's fitting because there is this lineage of daughters in the book.
Right.
And my only hesitation about it was that I feel like there are a lot of books in the world that are, the shoemaker's daughter or the bread baker's daughter. And, no offense to those books, it's hard to title a book, and I'm sure they're lovely books. But I thought that it might get kind of lost in those. What I ended up thinking is that I really like this title because it's a little bit different than that. Instead of focusing on trying to tag the women of the novel to a paternal figure that they are the daughters of, they are themselves. It is about the daughters themselves, and they only come from one another. And yeah.
Speaking of the marketing team's influence on decisions that were made about the book, how much say did you have in the cover design?
The beautiful cover.
The beautiful cover design.
I think I probably had more than some people. I didn't design it. The wonderful people at Liveright designed it. A lot of people have asked me if I drew the cover, and I did not. But I love it a lot. They showed me, I had no interaction with them at all. Like, I didn't tell them what I wanted. I didn't, nothing like that. And then my editor sent me two options, and one of them was a sort of slightly different, but basically a version of this. And me and my agent both sort of leapt all over this one, and the other one was also nice. But I think they had been leaning towards the other version, which was, it just looked, it was whiter. It looked sort of like stone, like it was carved from stone. But to me, in a small, like JPEG version, it looked like a wedding invitation. Like, deckled paper. And so that was part of why I leaned towards this one. And
well, it's beautiful.
thank you. People seem to like it.
Yes. Do you have anything that you wanted to share with the audience? I know that you mentioned something before.
Oh yeah.
Our talk.
Just in case any Googlers who are interested in this are listening. So as Lizzie knows, I was one of the early members of the Authors at Google team, and I think that one of the great things that people outside of Google don't know about Google is that there are ways to sort of carve out niches within the company for what you're passionate about, and a lot of those end up also being forms of corporate philanthropy that are really wonderful for the company and for the world. And I think that's something great that Google could do that I would love to help Google administrate would be to set up a fellowship for young writers, emerging writers. So each person, you'd have a bunch of people apply. I'm sure it would be huge. Social media would lose its mind. Literary Twitter.
Would
and
these be
they would.
Sorry.
So the way that I imagine it, somebody, once we picked a person or two people, say, they would come and they would have an office at Google, and they would have, a lower salary, for the year, like a stipend essentially, and they would have office hours, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and any Googler could come to them to get advice on either their own personal writing projects or a project for Google, whatever, just like feedback from a working writer. And then the writer could maybe give a workshop as well, like every quarter or twice a year or something like that, for Googlers to get expert advice on their work. And in return, the writer would get most of their time free to work, to pursue seriously a project, it's very difficult when you graduate from an MFA program, or if you don't go to an MFA program and you're just trying to get by on your day job and you're trying to work on a book. It's hard. You need time, and it's hard without recognition or like something that you can sell yourself with. And this would be a really awesome thing, especially in the Bay Area where there's already so much great focus on things like the Stegner program at Stanford.
What's the Stegner program?
It's something similar, but it's embedded within a university setting.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. And would these be internal people who would apply for this fellowship, or would they be external, or would it be open to everybody?
Open to everybody, I would think.
Thank you.